We got to May, we set up this first challenge. I think I have to say also from my perspective here, right? It might have seemed like I was putting a ton of effort, but essentially we're maybe spending an hour and a half on a call every 2 weeks. And then on top of that, I would have to put 10 minutes in to just script that little challenge for you. I put them in the text format, just send them over to you. It doesn't take long to actually think of a simple example like that. In some cases, I had to think a little bit longer, and I would test an API, like the Open Weather Map API you used for the first challenge, just to make sure that I'm not throwing you towards a challenge you can't even complete. But the point for me was there to to provide you with something that's a little bit more than a tutorial. And I feel this is exactly when we started recognizing with that first app that we built, with the weather app, the concept of tutorial hell, something that I don't know if you coined it or you read it somewhere else, but I love that term. So good. Because until then, what you were doing, essentially, you were going to a website, to a YouTube video, to whatever else you were following, and you were just, you were looking at a tutorial, opening your VS Code, and almost, I know you weren't copy-pasting it, right? But you were essentially just following through, and by the end of it, you would have had a working React component. Let's talk about how completely different it is to do that as opposed to a specification given to you by someone, or the one you wrote up yourself. I would like to build a calculator. I would like to build an app that reads weather or turns my lights on or whatever, right? And just think, okay, step one, what the hell do I even do, right? And step two, what do I do after that? And you think, like, I don't know. All that time, right? It would be somebody else taking my hand and just leading me the way. And now you have to come up with these things yourself. So something I think also is maybe quite difficult to kind of pick out of tutorials. Not often it's, not often tutorials will throw you into doing things like that. More often they will focus on a single skill, on a single technology that you have to use and learn, assuming that skill of turning specification, whether it's in your head or written, into, a number of steps they need to take to complete a particular app is something that isn't so easy to acquire, right? So I remember that moment that we realized that this was the problem. You told me this essentially and highlighted that. And I remember you speaking about it quite a lot in your Instagram daily kind of videos. That was quite big of a breakthrough, I think, around that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you're right. The weather app was relatively simple for me because I'd done a tutorial that just used a different API the week before, and you said try not to just copy and paste, but I was like looking at it going, okay, well, if I just switch that bit out, and I was like, okay, there it is, wicked. Yeah. React Master. Right. And it was only the second project where there was no tutorial. It was a project that we sort of both thought would be quite a good one, which was the coaching question generator, which once you know a bit about JavaScript, you go, okay, well, it's just you've got an array of questions and you just have to randomly pick one from that array. That frame of looking at it didn't exist when I started that project. I didn't understand, where do you even start with this? Because the first project was more, I think if I remember your words, it was having data in a view. So go get data from somewhere, display it. When you're adding more functionality, like having something that does something and moves, that's where I really sort of struggled. And tutorial hell isn't my phrase. I think I must have picked it up, but it didn't resonate with me at the time because I hadn't hit it, and I thought, no, I'll be all right. I'm all right. But my word, that project was easily the hardest part of the journey because it got to the stage. It was mentally overwhelming because you don't know where to start. And the thing that I struggled with at that stage was I had no ability to debug, and I was so scared of trying something in case it went wrong, and then a red error message came up that would then piss me off. I almost froze. I was like, fuck. I remember it was a really just a frustrating period because even, I'd be doing my coding in the morning and my mood would be affected for the whole day. And people could see it. They were like, are you all right, mate? I'm like, yeah, just a bit, trying to do this coding stuff. And it killed me. It killed me for like a week. But it's because I didn't know what to do after the thing that I tried didn't work. And that's when we realized that was an issue. And we looked at being able to understand what those error messages mean, which is another skill in itself. Because if you can decipher the error message, you've got a rough idea of what you've done wrong, and also a rough idea of what you can do differently. But if you can't read those error messages, it's like, well, I've just got to take another random shot in the dark and hope that works. And that's the catch-22 I was in at that stage.
Man, I'm there's a big part of me that I feel, there's a lesson in all that journey for you. Hopefully there's a lesson for a lot of people that are listening right now too. There's a massive lesson for myself. I feel I wish I had recognized that this was happening sooner, So there were possibly some clues that I could use to read that you were indeed in that tutorial hell. You were struggling to do that, specification to steps, translation in your head when you were coding. You didn't know where to start. And on top of that, you were having troubles with debugging. Later, in fact, we uncovered even more errors errors. I think other things that we could have improved upon that like my coding mentality assumes that it will happen, but like I totally misread that you would be doing it too, and you weren't. So it's important, as you are mentoring somebody else as well, to be very acute to these things that are essential and so important and so key to your progress. If we didn't fix these things, it would be a big issue essentially for you to go forward and still not know how to debug, right? And still read these error messages and just have no idea. So once we step back and we did a few of these sessions when I shown you debugger, I shown you how to put console logs, how to put breakpoints in there. A lot of that obviously you were picking up on your own. So our sessions were kind of part me giving you advice and kind of putting you back on track, and a little bit as well doing actual work with code and reviewing some of the code you wrote, right? So there's a bit of both there. So once we managed to pick up on these things that were missing, the most burning, the most kind of missing things in your skill set, things kind of started getting a little bit easier for you. And I just myself, I think it's important as a mentor to be capable of recognizing these situations, right? So it's not just about, I know things, so I will tell you, Sam, which way to go, right? Or I can look at your code and I can tell you what's wrong with a minute. Or I can spend an hour explaining to you the difference between promises and acing await. It's not about how much I know at some point. It's about understanding the problem that you're struggling with and digging into it and getting a little bit deeper and trying to see, the reason why you are stuck on this thing for 3 hours is because to you this message means nothing. Like my mind goes like, cannot read a parameter map of undefined. I go, dang, this line of code, right? I would have never thought that you looking at that code, that error message, would have gone through, I might just change line 74. Maybe that will, fix it. That you don't have that capability at that stage, right? So it's an important part of tutoring, essentially, and mentoring somebody. I suppose, you could argue I became more of your tutor at these moments, more than a mentor itself. But essentially, to be support to someone like yourself would be to look for exactly these moments, not just the gaps in the knowledge that are kind of obvious and screaming, Sam, you need to learn React, you need to learn how to use GitHub, but see where are these very kind of burning key points that you'd be missing and highlight them and try to help you overcome these, right? And that has been happening also later in the future. We'll get into that. That's another burning issue that we discovered much later on, which I'm also super happy we did find in the end. But it only shows how hard it may be sometimes to realize that there are things that are missing, right? So there was another thing I didn't catch until the day we were applying for the job already. Do you remember that?
No.
Okay, well, I'll keep it a secret and we'll get into that the moment that we get into it. Okay. Anyway, so we did manage to get on top of debugging, get on top of, get out of tutorial hell. I also remember I was at a time that you struggled a little bit to grasp a scope of your app, and we got into kind of trying to nail down the task at hand to tiny steps. So I showed you this method of essentially writing pseudocode in comments that you're about to be filling in with your proper code to break things down into just kind of these chunks. Okay, well, I'll just make a comment that this is where my component has to go and it has to do this. And this is a function of that component, it has to do that. This is a little subcomponent here that has to do this and that. First, just kind of laying it out using comments, and only then getting into this mentality of, what is the next smallest thing that I can do to accomplish my task? Don't think about the end project. Don't think about the end product. Don't think about what will be. Think about, okay, well, I need to build the next Facebook. What will be the first smallest thing I could do right now to move in the direction of ending up with Facebook at the end of it, right? This may not be the good advice for, professional, mid to senior developers. You know this, and probably will get more of that essentially it's good to plan ahead a little bit more, but especially when you're learning, when you're in early stages and you struggle to grasp your head around bigger projects, it sometimes is a very good idea to just say, what's the tiniest bit I can do? I could probably put together an HTML page and fill it with a few forms and maybe a button, and I could try to introduce a user class that maybe will have a name and a surname and a list of friends as an array, right? So like you start asking these silly little questions and you think, well, this is not Facebook. I'm like, yeah, but you're not meant to be doing Facebook in step one. You're meant to end up with Facebook. But step one, what is the smallest thing that you could do? And if there is even further breakdowns you can do and go even more granular, then do that and get into this first little piece of code you can write to just get you started. And that mentality, I think, also kind of make some progress into helping you turn the specification into the business specification into actual steps that you could take, right? Do you wanna talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Because I think around that time I started to read about like high-level architecture and how to plan a project, essentially. So just having a few steps to do before you even start thinking about code. How can you approach this problem? What aspects of JavaScript can you utilize? And what functionality do you need? So even just breaking it down to sort of mid-level before you even then go on to, granular level coding. But yeah, high-level architecture alongside pseudocode were two also very, very important stages. Because again, without having that knowledge, you don't know where to start, what to start with, well, I know I want to do this, but how do I do that in JavaScript? I know what I need to do conceptually, and this kind of runs on to the other thing that we did in June, was it sort of, once I did the pseudocode, I could write what I wanted to do, but I still couldn't quite do it in JavaScript. I knew conceptually what to do, but didn't really understand the syntax or how to execute that. So that highlighted a few sort of JavaScript fundamental gaps. And that's what got us, what I coined the JavaScript Gym. So we almost put React on hold again.
Yep.
And just spent, Edabit was the website that I used, and just started right at the bottom on really piss easy functions, but just getting used to writing a function. I'd never really done that before. Or I'd either copied it from a tutorial or maybe only wrote 3 functions per project because the projects were so small that, once you get that function working, you're onto something else and you forget what a function is and how to write it. So those skills really got improved over that month, which was June, was going down the JavaScript Gym, doing real basic functions. And the website was really cool. It's like, here's your little challenge, here's a bit of code, make that code work. And every time you type in something, it would either say, yes, you did it, or not quite. And you had to do some debugging. Okay, well, how come 3 of these work, but that 4th one didn't? How can I change my function that it still ticks the 3, but also now does the 4th? So just that ability to iterate and understand, again, because I think they give you the error messages there. So if it says, cannot find property of undefined, that sentence meant nothing to me a couple of weeks prior. Like I didn't even think about Googling it. I just didn't even register the concept of the computer telling me what I was doing wrong. It was like I was looking over here and going, I don't know what's wrong. And the computer's there going, mate, it's undefined. It's undefined.
Yeah. And what that means,
I just didn't have that ability.
Totally. That's the problem of tutorial hell. Everything works. There's no bugs. Yeah. Where would you read and learn about that if everything works, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, not every tutorial works, and that was what was, I think, almost lulled me into a false sense of security. Is every now and again something wouldn't work in the tutorial because it was either outdated or maybe one of us had done a typo, and I'd figured out a lot of those issues. So I was like, even if it doesn't work, I can work it out. But it was like so minor that it made me think that I knew more than I did. But yeah, just the JavaScript Gym the pseudocode. Because I remember before, like, it's almost laughable how easy some of those challenges were on Edabit. But like even something so simple would sometimes took me 2 hours to do. But then the more I would do, the time I would take would be less. And because I'd done all those ones prior, I was like, this is similar to that one. If I just do that.
Yeah.
And I needed to go through that process just to be able to think in JavaScript. And I think I likened it to my language abilities in as much that I can read Spanish, I can hear Spanish and comprehend Spanish, but I'm not very good at speaking it. So it's two very different skills, being able to read and understand, but then being able to speak. And it was the same in JavaScript. I could kind of read the code, but couldn't write it myself. Because when the input's coming to you, you can translate it and you can decipher it. You've got content there. Whereas when you're speaking or whether you're writing your own code, you need to create that from nothing, and that's a whole different skill. So that's
a really good analogy. Yeah,
that was something that really, it made me want to go down the gym and build up that speaking muscle, because it evidently wasn't as strong as I thought it was, and it was really sort of hindering my progress, really.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'm really glad we actually did do that and recognize that this was useful. And I could totally see the moment we finished the JavaScript Gym, how much you've improved. And we could go back to even some of the exercise from before, some of the challenges I wrote for you before, and kind of iterate on those and improve these, right?
Yeah, because I remember one of the quite a common suggestion people get when they're learning JavaScript is do Wes Boss's JavaScript 30 course. I think we even considered it at one stage. And I remember Countryside Coder James, he mentioned that one of his turning points was when he was able to have a look at the JavaScript 30 exercises, but not follow the tutorials. So he just looked at the spec and then built them. And I was like, how the hell did he do that?
Yeah.
And I'd be interested. I wouldn't mind having to go back and at least drafting how I would approach those now. But just that, listening to that sentence made me think, geez, that's phenomenal. How do you get to that stage where you can look at something and say, okay, we need an app that does this, this, and this. And in your head, you can go, okay, well, we need an object here, we need an array, we need a function that does this. There's JavaScript functions that are out there that do this for you, which was another reason why Edabit was great, is because it enlightened me to built-in functionality of JavaScript that I just wasn't aware was there. Like, rather than having to code out all the stuff, that it was, if you just put like dot map or dot filter or all these built-in methods, it was like, it's a lot easier than you think. But I just hadn't been exposed to that much in terms of JavaScript. And again, that's one of the pitfalls of being self-taught is you can omit some very basic things, which just because you didn't need at the time, you didn't know that you might need them later.
Totally.
So that was a really, really, I mean, they're all important steps, but that gym work really gave me a solid foundation to know that when I look at any sort of spec now, I've got a rough idea of how to approach it and what JavaScript, what my tools are, and how I can create.
Yeah,
because that's essentially the cool thing that I always knew was cool about coding is you can have an idea for something, but with no coding knowledge, you've got no idea how to create that. So then you'd have to go and speak to a developer and say, "Mate, I've got an idea for an app," but now I'm the guy that can come up with the idea and I can make it, which is such a cool skill.
Very useful indeed. Yeah. No, I'm definitely glad that we went ahead and did that. Yeah.